Gracias por acompañarnos en una nueva emisión de Sentados a la Mesa Podcast, un espacio creado para sentarnos contigo a la mesa y traer herramientas y soluciones para que tu familia vuelva al diseño original.
Hola, hola familia, les saluda Ana María Bagnuoli, hoy con una invitada especial que habla inglés, así que esta entrevista la vamos a hacer en inglés, pero vamos a ponerle subtítulos en español. Le pido por favor que comparta siempre estos podcasts que estamos haciendo, porque queremos construir familia con usted, queremos entregarle herramientas, queremos entregarle soluciones y por favor que se haga parte del mensaje Educa por Diseño. Es una instrucción que hemos recibido de parte del Padre Celestial, invitar a todas las familias a que conozcan el diseño educativo original. Voy a cambiar al inglés para presentarles a mi invitada de honor el día de hoy. So, hello Yvette. I was just giving a brief introduction in Spanish so that people know what we're doing in this podcast, and I would like people to get to know you better. So, Yvette Hampton is the producer and host of the documentary SchoolHouseRocked, the Homeschool Revolution, and the SchoolHouseRocked podcast. She's also a friend of mine. I've learned a lot from her. She's a professional producer, so today I'm taking class with her as we speak. She loves Jesus, and her greatest joy is being a wife and a mom. She and her husband Garrett have a passion for strengthening and equipping families and the homeschooling community by teaching parents how to live out their convictions, educate their children, and point them to Christ. So we share a lot of values. Thank you, Yvette, for being here with me today. It's really an honor to have met you a couple of years ago and meet your family, learn from you. We share many values and experiences as well as our viewers. And so please share a little bit of what you do and who you are as a family before we jump into more details.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you. This has been a long time that we've been trying to get together and record together. So I'm very excited about your podcast and all that you're doing. So thank you to you and Ricardo and your family. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm Yvette Hampton. I'm the host of the SchoolHouseRocked podcast, and I also hosted the documentary SchoolHouseRocked, the Homeschool Revolution. I produced that. My husband directed it. And we are a Jesus-loving homeschool family who we really strive to serve the Lord with the talents and abilities that He's given to us. And first and foremost is our allegiance to the Lord and loving Him and living our lives in a way that honors Him. And then next is, of course, our family. And we've got two daughters. And one just graduated from high school. We homeschooled her from the very beginning. And then our youngest is not going into 8th grade. She's in 8th grade this year. And so we've got 5 years left of homeschooling with her. And so we love it. We love teaching our girls from home. We love discipling their hearts and pointing them to Jesus in everything that we do. And so we get to work together like your family in full-time ministry.
Yes, we serve together as a family, and I think that speaks a lot to our community, to the Hispanic community. We are a family-oriented community, so we usually try to move as a pack. And to touch on that, I will like to ask you about how was your vision born, or the SchoolHouseRocked podcast was born?
Yeah, the podcast actually was kind of the second thing that came. Before the podcast, we started to film the documentary, SchoolHouseRocked, and that was kind of the birthplace of the ministry, the SchoolHouseRocked ministry. We had no plans ever to do a podcast. We were living in California. My husband worked in the Hollywood film industry, and so we, in 2016, just felt like the Lord was calling us to leave California and to film this documentary on homeschooling to answer so many of the questions that people have about home education. And so we left California, we sold our house, and we sold pretty much everything in it. And like your family, we loaded our family up into an RV and we left California to go film this documentary. And it took about 3.5 years to film it. And in the process of filming, we met so many amazing people in the homeschool world, authors and speakers and, podcasters and bloggers. And so my husband said, why don't we do a podcast with these people that we now know? We can interview them and talk about homeschooling, because we knew once the movie came out, it would hopefully encourage people, which it has, to home educate their children. But we didn't want to leave them just high and dry, okay, now we're going to homeschool, but now what? So we wanted to produce a podcast that would then answer all of the questions that people have about homeschooling. And really, homeschooling is parenting. It's discipling our kids. And so we talk about everything having to do with the family. We talk about academics. We talk about marriage. We talk about parenting. We talk about sibling relationships. We talk about curriculum. We talk about, structure for our homeschool day. We talk about the different styles of homeschooling, and all of that comes together in the weekly podcast. And so that's how the podcast it started with the movie, and then kind of morphed into the podcast. And then the movie came, the final product of the movie came after we had been doing the podcast for a few years.
So when do you release your episodes, and how many do you release per week?
Yeah, it's one 3-part episode each week. So it's the same guest. And what happened was we started out doing just one episode a week, and we were trying to keep it to 30 minutes. But that 30 minutes just went by so fast, and I felt that I needed to talk about more. I had more questions. So then we split it into 2 20-minute episodes, and we would do a 40-minute interview and split that into 2 20-minute episodes. And then I still felt like, but there's so many more things I want to talk about with most of my guests. So we then went to an hour-long interview, and we split that hour-long interview into 3 20-minute episodes. So it's one long interview with the same guest, but split into 3 separate episodes each week.
So you heard the SchoolHouseRocked podcast. You can now go and follow them. They're on YouTube, they're on Spotify. What other platforms do you use, Yvette?
Every platform, anywhere you can find podcasts, we are there. And we do have, like you said, a YouTube channel. So it's video as well. So for those who enjoy video, they can watch the video.
It's a great tool. I am very blessed by your podcast as well. I listen to you at least once a week, and I love it that you touch on so many topics that are frequent questions that we all have. So it's really worth just connecting to your community. And thank you for sharing that. So you said the documentary was first.
Yes.
You mentioned the documentary. It took 3 years and a half to record. But I would like our community to know more about that documentary, because they can download it. It has Spanish subtitles. You guys brought it actually to our first in-person conference here in Miami. We had the privilege of putting that documentary during lunchtime, and all the parents stayed and watched it with Spanish subtitles. So I would like to give you that opportunity to share more details of what you have in that documentary, where people can get it.
Yes, the documentary, the reason that we started it in the beginning was because we were a family who said we would never homeschool our kids. And the reason we said we would never homeschool was because we did not understand homeschooling. We didn't understand the benefits and the blessings of home education. We believed all the misconceptions and negative stereotypes that people had about homeschooling. And so we would kind of, make fun of the homeschool people and say we would never do that to our kids. We would never do that to ourselves. And we're from Los Angeles, California. And when it came time to homeschool our oldest daughter, or when it came time to put her in school, the school system that she would be a part of was not a good option for us. It would not have been safe, even physically, for her to go to school there. So we just said, well, we can maybe homeschool for kindergarten. We had a lot of friends at that time who homeschooled, and we had started to watch them a little bit. And so they were encouraging us, and so we thought, well, we'll just try it for the first year. And we went to a homeschool convention, and that homeschool convention really changed our hearts about homeschooling. And it was, like I say, it was like the scales fell from our eyes, and we were able to see it for what it was.
So that's what the documentary is. Basically, it helps all those scales to drop down, because you have really good guests on that documentary. Like, you have pioneers Speaking of that documentary, what can you say about that? Who is on that documentary? What are they talking about?
Yes. So the main, kind of the main voice in the documentary is Heidi St. John. She's throughout the entire documentary, and then woven throughout the conversation and the storyline, we have Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis. We have Rachel Carmen, Ginger Hubbard, Israel Wayne, Andrew Pudawa. I mean, we just have an incredible lineup of guests. Sam Sorbo. So a lot of people who speak about homeschooling and write books about homeschooling. And then we also talk to just regular families like yours and mine, which all of those families are regular families too, but people who are not speaking or writing books on homeschooling, and wanted to just get a really good overview of what homeschooling was and really debunk all of the misconceptions that people had about home education and bring encouragement, answer all the questions that people have about it.
Where can people download that documentary, Yvette?
Through our website, SchoolHouseRocked.com, and it's ROCKED, SchoolHouseRocked.com. And if they just go to our website, it's right on the front page, and they can click the stream for free button, and it's free to stream. And as you mentioned, it has Spanish subtitles. It has subtitles in several different languages now. So German, French, Spanish, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but it's been translated into several different languages.
So you heard it. Please share that. I've seen the documentary. It's really a really dense and so well put together. It really helps you understand from the get-go, even if you're a beginner. You need the foundation. I've seen that now that we're having a huge shift in homeschooling, a lot of parents don't have the foundation to that way of education. We do have a history. We do have a biblical worldview on the way we need to raise the next generation. There's so many aspects of home education that is not just centered on the academics, on the choosing of a curriculum. There's so much more that we're doing at home. And I think your documentary really puts that into video format and educates the parent in a very wholesome way, not just gearing it towards academics. So we're leaving that on the notes as well for our people to follow you and to find that documentary. So based on that documentary, that leads me to this question. Why do you think it's so crucial for parents to understand the power of education, particularly at this point in time in history? You did this documentary 3 years ago, and education was still critical and still important. But I feel like as time progresses, parents are realizing the impact and the influence of education. So what's your view? What do you think? It's so important, so crucial, really, that's the word, crucial, right now for parents to know about the power of education.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Really, education is indoctrination. And you will sometimes hear people say, the public schools are indoctrinating our kids, or they'll say the church is indoctrinating our kids. And the thing is indoctrination is something that everybody is doing in some way or another. So indoctrination really is teaching a doctrine or a principle with a specific point of view. And so our kids are learning something from somebody. And so if we have them in a traditional school, they are learning the specific point of view, those doctrines, those principles, those beliefs that the public school system wants them to learn. Sure. When we keep our kids home with us, we get to teach them what we believe God has instructed us as their parents to teach them according to God's word. And so for us as a Christian homeschool family, we think it is the most important thing to point our kids to Jesus, to tell them about God, about God's love for them, about how God created them on purpose and with a purpose. And we think that that is far more important than any of the academics. So the academics are important. Every subject that they learn is important, but those are important in order to point our kids back to their Creator and to teach them about Him. And so teaching everything from a biblical worldview is very important to us. So when we teach history from the beginning of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the beginning of history.
Mm-hmm.
And we teach history as a whole story, not just what the secular school textbooks are teaching. And science the same way. You know, when we teach science so that people can understand who the creator is. And teaching them, you know, even our kids how to read, we teach them how to read so that they can read the word of God, not so that they can just read any nonsense book that's available to them. You know,
Right.
it's fun to read fun books sometimes, but really ultimately the purpose of teaching our kids to read is so that they can read the word of God. And so all of the things that we're teaching our kids are being taught so that they will understand who God is and understand their role in this world. And so that for us is the most important part of understanding the power of education, and it's our why. It's why we've chosen to homeschool our kids.
Yeah, I will add to that education is building a mindset, and when you have that privilege, you are really training your children how to think and how to see the world out there,
Yes.
which is the biblical worldview. And you can imagine if you just create your own worldview, you can transfer that to a child and then start promoting that made up worldview, when it's way much easier just to trust the creator of humankind and everything we see in the way we should function and the order he establishes for all of us. What we see nowadays is a society that is very disorganized, very disconnected, making up their own mind and calling things however they want, completely deviating from its original model, its original way it was created. So definitely there's huge power in education. I don't think that this is new, what we're saying, but we are really seeing right now live the fruit of the power of education. And we are in this battle of ideologies that are running rampant on the streets, and parents have something to say, and we really can step in the middle of this battlefield and start making a difference. It's really a call to stand up and use your not only parental rights, but I believe use your position, God-given position in your home to educate your children that were assigned to you, which is your responsibility, in the way they should go, in the way they were created to go. And then that's the rest is up to the Holy Spirit and the obedience of our children. But we do have a call, and it's not just rights, and it's not just my benefits, and it's not just my children. So we do have a responsibility, parents, and we cannot just keep watching what happens. We have to step in and even learn from scratch if we don't know, which is what we're sharing here today. We're sharing your documentary, sharing information that parents don't know about. And we're trying to build you with tools so that you can do a better job than you're doing right now, starting at home. So based on your personal experience, Yvette, as a homeschooler, you graduated already one of your children, one of your daughters. What 3 key principles do you think any family should keep very present during their journey to get to the finish line, if we can call it a finish line?
Yes. Well, I think the first one, like I said, is you have to know why you're doing what you're doing. And I think, you know, it's interesting. People often will ask the question, what is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? What is life all about? Why am I on this earth? People, I think most humans get to that point in their life at some point where they're wanting to know, like, why am I even here? What am I doing here? And my favorite verse in the Bible is Ecclesiastes 12:13. And it's the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And that verse tells us what our whole purpose in life is to fear God and keep his commandments. And so going back to that question of why are you homeschooling? Well, you should be homeschooling to teach your kids to fear God and keep his commandments. And the reason for that is because we know that when we obey God's commandments, it comes with blessings. We tell our kids all the time that that sin causes pain, but obedience brings blessings. And we want our kids to be obedient to the Lord. They're not perfect. We're not perfect. We're all sinful, but we want them to live a life to the best of their ability, and us to live our lives to the best of our ability to honor and obey the Lord and to keep his commandments and to fear him. And so the first thing, like I said, is really just knowing why you're doing what you're doing. If you don't know why you're homeschooling, you're not going to want to continue to homeschool. You're going to want to give up because it gets hard. It's hard to homeschool. It's fun and there are many blessings in it, but it's also difficult sometimes. The other reason, though, that for our family has been a really big deal is the relationships that we have with our girls. I love the relationships that I have with both of my girls. And I know you are the same way. We've been around your family quite a lot, and you have great relationships with your kids. And I don't think that we would have the same kind of relationship with our girls that we have with them if they were away from us for most of their childhood. You know, when kids are away at school, they're gone from their parents for 30 to 40 hours a week, every week, except for through the summer months,
right,
for their entire childhood. And then the number is different depending on who you talk to, but it's anywhere between 12 and 16,000 hours of their childhood that they spend apart from their families. And it's important that we're the ones who are teaching them. We are instilling our values in them. Luke 6:40 says a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. And so homeschooling puts the parents in the driver's seat of their child's life. We get to be the ones who are teaching them and training them because we become their teacher. And so we have to look at who's teaching them, and whoever is spending the most time with them is typically the people who will have the greatest, strongest relationships with them, whether that be their friends or their teachers or, someone else. And so we like to be the ones who have the greatest relationships with our kids. And then the last reason I would say is homeschooling allows us to teach to our kids strengths and weaknesses. So if we have a child who's really strong in maybe the area of math, they can, you could have a 7th or 8th grader in algebra 2 because they really understand math. Or you can have a 9th grader who's, in still doing math 7 or math 8 because they're just struggling. And that's okay. Right. God created every child differently, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. And so with homeschooling, we get to teach our kids the way that is best for them and not put them in the box that every school child in a classroom is being forced into. And so I think that's a really important thing, is being able to teach to their abilities.
And help them know themselves. I call it, you need to know your strengths. You were created for a purpose. You are not here to do it all. And it's, when you have multiple children, you can see that in action. How they complement each other, how they fight each other, how they argue. But really what they're showing is their strengths, and they learn to work as a team. It's a process, of course. Whoever has more than 2 children knows that you get the fights. But
even with 2 children.
Right? Even between husband and wife. And we're called to be complementary. We're here to bless each other with this trend. So I do appreciate your input. I agree on what you're saying. The why has held us in this journey for 13 years, because there's moments where you question yourself, where you question if you're in the right path, especially the beginning years. So the why is really your foundation. It holds you, and it brings you back to, why am I doing this? Like, I have a whole testimony of how and why we turned into homeschooling. And then the relationships, I think, is the most unique and powerful ingredient you can bring into home education that no other school system can provide. And that's why one of the reasons why we do what we do in transition ed is to focus on the home and the relationship. Everything stems out from that relationship, and it's absolutely biblical. Because if you read it from the beginning of the history of humankind, there was a relationship that was broken. We had a relationship with our Heavenly Father, and sin came in, and that relationship was broken. So everything is affected by relationships. And most of the problems we have today in society Yvette, I think stem out of relationship issues. Even
Yes.
the wars that we see, the problems that we see in society stem out from relationships, broken relationships, areas that we haven't healed about relationships, and so on and so forth. So that's a very strong and deep topic. We can do another episode on just relationships like you do. That's a big part of home education. So families, take note why the strength it brings to your relationships, and homeschooling really helps our kids learn about themselves, learn about their strengths, and what they could be doing when they partner with groups and teams and complement each other with their strengths, God-given strengths. So thank you for that, Yvette. So we have talked a lot, and I wonder, I always like to ask like veterans of homeschooling or leaders like you, what do you see happening in the next maybe 5 to 10 years in the homeschooling movement? Right now, we are like in a wave of growth, and we're seeing a shift of massive shift since 2020 almost. The movement has been around for many years, even before it was legalized in the United States. I think it's important for families to know that home education has always been around, and the other school system just came along like a couple of 100 years ago. But home education has always been the original way of educating the next generation in society. Now that we are on that wave of parents that are understanding and shifting, what do you think, or what do you see could be the future of home education here in the United States, maybe in the next 5 years or 10 years, if we can make that projection, but let's stay with 5. What do you think? Because you talk to so many leaders, I would like to know what they say, what you think.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think before I can move forward, I'll have to move backwards and say that the homeschooling world, the homeschooling movement has changed drastically in the last 4 years since COVID, because so many parents brought their kids home. People were thinking about homeschooling. They knew that there was something wrong in the public school system, but they couldn't put their finger on it. And a lot of parents wanted to homeschool, but they didn't understand homeschooling, and they didn't think they could do it. And then they were forced to bring their kids home because all the schools shut down. And many parents, millions of parents, have kept their kids home because they went, oh, I actually can do this. And so it really changed the face of homeschooling. The issue that we are seeing right now, and this is across the board with every homeschool leader, at least those who have been in the homeschooling world for several years, is that it used to be that parents were running to something. When you heard of a homeschooler, it was usually a very conservative Christian homeschool family, and they were running to the cross. They were trying to run towards Jesus. They were trying to point their kids to Jesus. Now, a lot of families are running from the public schools and from a lot of private schools, but they don't know exactly what they're running to. And so they're running kind of aimlessly. And to be honest, that has, it's created some problems in the homeschool world, because what used to be a small Christian conservative world has now expanded into, in a lot of cases, a very secular homeschool world. And here's the thing. I mean, every parent should have the freedom to teach their kids what they believe to be true. I mean, it's discipleship, and indoctrination, as I was talking about before. But for the Christian homeschooler, I think we need to just be aware of what reasonings people are giving for homeschooling, and be careful who you're surrounding yourself with. Don't assume anymore that the homeschool family next door is on the same page as you, that they have the same goals that you have. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, that probably would have been the case. Nowadays, that's not so much the case anymore. Sometimes it is, but it isn't always. And as a result of that, we see a lot of people running to government funding. So you've got a lot of people taking money from the government, charter schools, school vouchers, things like that. And a lot of people don't really understand that is government money, and with government money comes government control. And that's a very scary place to be. People think, oh, it's free money or it's my tax money. But in reality, it's the government wanting to take control of what you can and cannot teach to your children eventually. And so, and actually I shouldn't say eventually, they are already doing that. They are already controlling what parents can and cannot teach. And so I think we need to be mindful of that. We just did a big episode a few months ago on school choice and the dangers of taking government money. And it's been very well received because most people did not understand the dangers of it. And so a lot of people have listened to and watched that episode, and their ears have opened up, and they have finally understood what the dangers are. So yeah, I think looking back, it's changed. Looking forward, if we don't start taking back control of the homeschool movement, and we don't push the government out, they're going to do everything they can to try to control what we're doing in homeschooling. Right. There are some states that are very free. We live in a free state. We live in the state of Oklahoma, and we have no regulations really for homeschooling. They trust the parents to do the best with their kids. But then there's other states like New York and New Jersey that have very, very strict rules and regulations and laws for homeschooling. And so, so I think we need to be mindful about how much control we're allowing the government to have.
No, and we need to educate the parent on all of this, because this information is kind of lost in the middle of all of that is happening in society. And
yes,
I feel like homeschooling, I've been homeschooling 13 years, but it's becoming more like a trend than an intentional movement of how to educate kids. And so I understand your point when you say it's not concerning, but it definitely has some challenges ahead. So growth is good, but how is that growth happening? How fast, and what are we doing with that? It's important. It's like when you have a child and they start growing, well, you need to change the size of the clothing, and you need to change the food you're giving them because they're growing, and you have to set limits as well. So definitely studying the history of home education, understanding the origin of the school system, understanding how government works will definitely help parents make better decisions and understand what are they running to. How you said, we need to understand that the years ahead are going to be challenging. I'm thankful for the organizations that fight for our freedoms and that fight